I wanted to talk just a little bit as we started, just about, I mean, how Dropsite came to be, how you ended up at Breaking Points. There's a lot of talk right now about MSNBC. In fact, we covered it on Breaking Points this morning, becoming MS Now, talking about themselves as independent and insurgent and against corporate media. But once upon a time, Ryan, you were a contributor at MSNBC. Right. And you've been in this business a long time now, but mostly in new media. I mean, even when Politico was new media, you were at Politico. So tell us about the path kind of to Dropsite for you as you look back on it now that Dropsite's about a year in the works.
I mean, I'm so old that MSNBC was new media when I was getting into it. Yeah, and then I also started at the Huffington Post in basically end of 08, early 09, before they were basically hiring journalists. I was basically I think it was the first reporter they'd hired who already had a job doing reporting. At that point, Sam Stein was already there, but they had hired him out of journalism school. He's now editor of the Bulwark. He's doing great. So that thing, as you remember, like you were in college then, right? Or not yet, but you
dangerous question.
Were headed towards college.
I may have been around the college age frame.
Yeah, that there was a period during the Obama years where the Huffington Post was, dominant when it came to kind of setting the tone for like whatever we decided to put up on our what we called the splash. They still call it the splash. Basically the banner image. It was deliberately mirroring Drudge. An hour later, or maybe 2 hours later, you'd see cable start to cover it. Like you could just watch it happen like clockwork. And we knew the cable producers that like they were watching Drudge and they were watching HuffPost, and that's where they took their directions, which is kind of a wild thing to think about. And then so then after Trump won, I end up over at The Intercept, which is where I was when I started doing Breaking Points. I would fill in for Crystal.
Back then it was Rising.
Still do.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Rising. Then it was Rising. Whenever she needed to take a day off or needed to take a week off.
Crash a golf cart. Yep.
Crash a golf cart. Did you ever fill in? Because I would only be a side Sagar then because they wouldn't both be gone at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I filled in a bit for Sagar, like maybe once or twice, but we didn't start hosting together until they left, and we were kind of temporary, but really liked working together. And that's been, I think, 4 years, 5 years, something like that.
There. Yeah, I remember they told me 2 weeks, and I was like, okay,
same.
Yeah, I can do 2 weeks.
But see, the Breaking Points to Dropsite pipeline, or the Rising to Breaking Points to Dropsite pipeline, I think is important because I bet when you were thinking about leaving The Intercept, it was on your mind that something had fundamentally shifted. Like, even as someone who is in new media, it felt like being at Breaking Points, we felt, I think earlier than a lot of people, the floodgates had totally opened.
Yes, and also around that time, you start to see social media failing in what it used to do, which was like where people talked about news and distributed news articles. Like at the Huffington Post, the rankings would always come out from Facebook, and we'd always be fighting to be at the top of the most shared articles. What's his name from Ben? What's his name?
Oh, Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, right. Ben Shapiro. He'd always be up there, and we'd be up there. And it was like the main source of traffic for news sites. And then around 2015 or so, they literally started paying news organizations money to make video. And you started getting this giant pivot to video. I think the Huffington Post, the first year, they gave them like $1 million. It was like a disastrous, like poison chalice, because then they're like, this isn't working anymore. After Trump was won, they basically closed off news. Like, you know what? Forget this. This is a mess. So let's just not do news at all. And so then there's still Twitter by 2020, but you could see that fading, and you could also see people.
It had lost its greatest poster by early 2021.
Right. And it wasn't people weren't right, he'd been kicked off. Um and people just weren't reading it like they used to.
Mm,
Like I'd like to go back and like in the 2010s, like writing mattered. Like, you had all those kind of sharp, like Gawker style,
mm.
um,
The personal essay
like
boom.
the personal
Right.
essay boom, like if stuff was read and people enjoyed reading. You don't get that much anymore
Hmm.
unless I'm missing it. Um, I think with an audience, like we still send out our stories by email, and that's
Mm,
a way to hit people that are like 40 and up, and they still read, and that's great
right.
because I think if you're not reading and writing, like you're not thinking, like you're fundamentally losing something about what it is to be human.
Mm,
At the same time, I think the loneliness crisis and the like collapse of community played into the rise of YouTube,
mm,
because like these shows become companions for people,
mhm,
and it becomes like a stand-in for socializing. You don't
mm.
have time to socialize, but you're stuck in the car. At least you can like get a facsimile of it. So yeah, so all those things combined were suggesting that like if you want to continue reaching people, you're going to have to do it in a different medium.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I saw a Pew survey today, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about this. That found 49% of people who responded thought that journalists were losing influence. And the survey was questioning members of the public basically on what is a journalist. And there was a lot of disagreement about whether someone who sends out a newsletter or makes videos on TikTok or whatever is actually considered a journalist, is a podcaster a journalist. And I think you and I mean, my simple definition of a journalist is anybody who is engaged in the news business and is the one who is, communicating the news. So you're not in the business side, but you're communicating the news, and the news is new information. That can be new analysis, it can be new opinion, but that's sort of the way that I think about it. How are you thinking about what a journalist is, and whether journalists are losing influence, or whether our definition of journalism is just expanding or contracting right now?
Yeah, I
You're
think
on
it should.
TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. I think it should. I think it needs to expand, and it needs to include anybody um, who has an audience, and I think that's a key point of it. Like if you don't have an audience, you can do journalistic activity, but like it's not really you're not really doing journalism. You have to create the newspaper or the news or the podcast or the show, or like
Jim
you have to.
Acosta, hardest hit.
Ooh, you got to have something. Like you have to have people reading it, or the tree falling in the woods. Um, but I think that the people, and if you're talking about news and if you're sharing information, you're a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think all of these comedian buddies of ours have to understand that. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
if you're gonna be presenting news, if you're gonna be a source of news to people, that doesn't mean you have to follow all of the different like ethics that are written down in like the AP style guide.
Do you have an AP style guide next to you? Is that what
Actually,
you
I
were
have it.
reaching for?
No, I was knocking the cat off the shelf.
Oh,
I actually just did
I thought you were
literally.
reaching for an AP style guide, but instead it was
No,
your cat.
wait, I literally did stumble on an AP style guide the other day.
Ancient. Now you can just ask Grok. I just realized that, like, even I'm young and even I had to pull for an
It's
AP style guide when I started, but now you could literally just type into Grok,
You
what's
could,
AP style for this or that?
and there's a 80% chance Grok will tell you the truth.
69% chance.
Yes. So yeah, so those are journalists, and also I think about this too in terms of First Amendment. Like the
Hmm.
First Amendment, the freedom of the press is in there, but so is freedom of speech. And freedom of speech, and it doesn't say freedom of the press only applies to licensed journalists. Like it applies to everybody. So we want those freedoms, and all need to protect those freedoms. But then if you're going to accept the privileges of those freedoms, there's some responsibility to it too. And so you have to, then I think, just you have to just absorb that. Like, yeah, you call yourself a comedian, but you're getting like you're sharing news with people.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I
So
think
you
that's
got
really
to
important.
try to be as accurate as you can. is what I would mean by
It
that.
seemed like that hit Joe Rogan at a certain point. Remember, he said about a year ago that he was pausing, like he wasn't going pedal to the metal on politics anymore, and he seemed to get really uncomfortable with having to talk to candidates. And I don't know when it hit him. I think the Bernie Sanders thing hit him really hard, and you were kind of in the middle of that. Like, you literally wrote a book about it's right, the cover's right behind you. It's called The Squad.
I got a couple pages on that. On that moment.
And that was fleeting, though, because the demand is really there for podcasters to have these conversations. And the left right now is waking up to the reality that there's an audience, there's an appetite among just normal people, whether they're independents or swing voters, who want that. They just want that blend, which is weird because I feel like news used to be much more segmented. It was, you got your political at the top from Cronkite, and then you moved on, and then the local was after, whatever. But people obviously want that, and it just, to me, is sort of head spinning how Democrats went from almost canceling Bernie Sanders, fully canceling Joe Rogan, and almost canceling Bernie Sanders for talking to the guy, to now desperately trying to figure out how to recapture that.
Right, but not him.
Yeah, of course.
Although there are some, I've noticed Media Matters lately. If you've checked their Twitter feed, they will take a Tim Dillon comment and clip it and share it. Interesting.
About negative about Trump, something like that. Very interesting.
Which in the past they would not have done, because the left generally would say he endorsed Trump, therefore he's a bad person. Therefore, anything he says is bad. Anybody who shares anything he says is also bad. So they would just completely cordon it off. So the fact that they're now sharing it, I think, shows that rubric is broken down, and they're like, oh, we actually need to engage here. This whole thing where we tried to like completely cordon things off and shut down debate and cancel everything outside of this narrow bound, it didn't work. Doesn't mean they have a principled objection to it, but it didn't work. So now, but it's smart. Like, at Dropsite at our feed, whenever any of those popular figures say anything about restraining American adventurism abroad, or talk about how awful things are in Gaza, like, we clip it and share it. And as a result, like, I think more people are aware that, like, there's this deep view in this podcast world, whereas like 3-4 years ago, nobody would do that, because you're like, yeah, they're bad. They're bad on this, so we can't, if you elevate them. I would do it, and like Glenn would do it, but like there wouldn't be enough of a like concerted effort.
Well, that was actually what I was going to ask you about next, because if you spend enough time in journalism in Washington, D.C., you kind of lose you're in a bubble even if you try to get out of your bubble. But I feel like your background has been particularly helpful, and you've been in a lot of spaces where conservatives definitely are not overrepresented, that's for sure, but you've probably seen part of the reason, which is because class dynamics, and as the parties and the class allegiances have shifted, that's really affected newsrooms. But I feel like you grew up on the Eastern Shore, and this is your life. This is not that dissimilar from you. No offense to Sam Stein, but you talked about him being plucked out of J school and going to the HuffPost. But that's a lot of people's stories. And I guess I'm curious, Ryan, if as you think about it, one of the reasons you were sort of ahead of where some people on the left are looking at now, like Pod Save America guys, for example, is your own background and your own understanding that for a lot of people, institutional trust is so low that they consume their news, I think, partially from like an Andrew Schultz or a Joe Rogan, because they just can't stand the sight of a guy telling them this is the way the world is when they don't trust him.
Yeah, that could be some of it. Yeah, because the place where I grew up, there are tons and tons of right-wing people who were also good people, even though they're wrong about X issue. Most of the issues. Actually.
All the same things I'm wrong on. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although back then they were even like, they're for the first Gulf War. They're for the. That's when I was in 7th grade. I'm like, what do we go to war with?
Schwarzkopf?
Was it fifth grade? It's like, what do you mean? What? Kuwait have to do with us? What are you talking about? Um, there was a lot of moral majority stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like it felt even more salient almost, even though
Yep.
Now they've actually gotten Roe and
Mm-hmm.
but like at least where I was, like the moral majority community was like dominant.
Hmm.
And I hated that stuff. But I liked the people.
Hmm.
So yeah. And also then I always hated, not hated, but like, I was one of those people that thought both parties were awful. And I mean, I still think both parties are awful.
I was going to say,
don't need to put that in past tense.
Also ahead of the game.
I do think I don't know, they're both pretty terrible. Good Lord. And so when I came into covering politics, because I was like, yeah, I wasn't liberal. I was like left.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, a lot of the Republicans in Washington were able to work with me better, probably because I wasn't supporting Democrats either.
Right.
I didn't like either of them.
Right.
I remember talking to one guy in Boehner's office when I was thinking about going from Politico to HuffPost. I was like, you guys still going to talk to me if I go over to HuffPost? And he's like, Grim, we've always known you're a communist. What are you talking about?
I love that. That's awesome.
It's like, yeah, I'm doing it.
Did you know all chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow? Up until the 1990s, when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils. Disgusting. Today, seed oils make up 20% of the average American's daily calories. Recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation, but Masa did something about it. You've heard me talk about this over the last couple of weeks. I love these chips. They created a delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils, organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. I literally just ate some before I came up here. These chips avoid all the bad stuff. They taste so good. Masa is crunchier, tastier, and doesn't break in your guac. Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Masa, you feel satisfied and light with no crash or bloat afterwards. And they're better. They just taste better too. The beef tallow makes the chips satiating so you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterwards. Masa chips is beloved by tens of thousands of customers and has been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts. I just saw my parents this weekend and brought them some. So if you're ready to give Masa a try, go to masachips.com/afterparty and use code afterparty for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/afterparty and code afterparty for 25% off your first order.